Practical Apologetics for a Christian Way of Life. Introducing Natural Theology. Suppose someone were to ask you, are there any good arguments for God? How would you respond? You might like to press pause on the video to have a ponder. Well, as philosopher Keith Yandell explains, it's the discipline of natural theology that is the attempt to provide good reasons for thinking that God exists. While many people find at least some arguments for God persuasive, as philosopher Stephen T. Davis observes, few arguments about anything are intellectually coercive. Formal theistic arguments are, generally speaking, a trade-off between accessibility, for example, brevity, being intuitively convincing, being grounded in common experience, and robustness, for example, explicit logical validity or dependence upon academic knowledge, and so on. For example, compare the intuition of design that might be evoked by showing people this video of a peacock, or the modal logic of the Plantingan version of the ontological argument on the other side of the screen. The peacock might be an accessible argument, as it were, although it's not really even an argument. The modal ontological argument is definitely an argument. You might think it's a robust one, but it's not particularly accessible. Most theistic arguments try to rationally motivate recognition of relationships between creation and God, where each relationship adds to our overall picture of God. Now, many of these relationships are intuitively perceived as being obvious or at least plausible by most people. For example, the Roman author Cicero wrote, "What could be more clear or obvious when we look up to the sky and contemplate the heavens than that there is some divinity of superior intelligence?" Some philosophers argue that intuitions like this are basic beliefs, grounded in experience, and that this means they are reasonable to accept in the absence of sufficient counter-evidence. In his book, Natural Signs and the Knowledge of God, philosopher C. Stephen Evans uses Enlightenment philosopher Thomas Reid's concept of natural signs to articulate a nuanced understanding of the link between experientially grounded intuitions and natural theology. For example, in discussing the cosmological argument, Evans observes that the perception of the world as contingent, as something that might never have been, is closely linked to the contrasting notion of something that lacks this character, something whose existence is in some way impervious to non-existence, a reality that has a deeper and firmer grasp on existence than the things we see around us. There's a much broader range of theistic arguments than most people realize. Alvin Plantinga once presented a paper outlining a couple of dozen or so arguments for God. Plantinga's paper inspired the book collection 2 Dozen or So Arguments for God. Indeed, theistic arguments tend to come in families that deal with the same general theme, such as causality or design, but in slightly different ways. The cosmological family of arguments claim to make clear the existence of various causal relationships between the existence of non-divine realities and the existence of God. For example, suppose I ask you to loan me a book and you say, well, I don't have a copy right now, but I'll ask my friend to lend me his copy and then I'll lend it to you. But suppose your friend says the same thing to you, and so on and so on. Well, two things are clear. First, if the process of asking to borrow the book goes on ad infinitum, that is to infinity, well, I'll never get the book. Second, if I get the book, then the process that led to me getting it can't have been one that went on to infinity, ad infinitum. Somewhere down the line of requests to borrow the book, someone had the book without having to borrow it. Likewise, argues Richard Purtill, consider any contingent or dependent reality, such as any physical thing or event. Purtill says the same two principles apply. If the process of everything getting its existence from something else went on to infinity, then the thing in question would never have existence. And if the thing has existence, then the process hasn't gone on to infinity. There was something that had existence without having to receive it from something else. As philosopher Dallas Willard argued, the dependent character of all physical states, together with the completeness of the series of dependencies underlying the existence of any given physical state, logically implies at least one self-existent and therefore non-physical state of being. The design family of theistic arguments claim to make clear the existence of relationships between the structure of various non-divine realities and the existence of God. For example, William Lane Craig notes how scientists have discovered that the existence of intelligent life depends upon a complex and delicate balance of initial conditions given in the Big Bang itself. These preconditions fall into an extraordinarily narrow range of life-permitting values. For example, a change in the strength of the atomic weak force by only 1 part in 10 to the power of 100 would have prevented the life-permitting universe that we have. The cosmological constant, which drives the inflation of the universe, is finely tuned to around 1 part in 10 to the power of 120. The odds of the Big Bang's low entropy condition existing by chance are on the order of 1 out of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. Craig observes that to detect design, in addition to high improbability, there also needs to be conformity to an independently given pattern. When these two elements are present, we have specified complexity, which is the tip-off to intelligent design. Thus, in a poker game, any deal of cards is equally and highly improbable. But if you find that every time a certain player deals, he gets all 4 aces, you can bet this is not the result of chance, but of design. Now, filling in the logical gap between the conclusion of intelligent design and the conclusion designed by God, let alone designed by the God of a particular religion, that takes us beyond the design inference made by the scientific theory of intelligent design and into the philosophical discipline of natural theology. Now, a logically valid argument for theism can be based upon intelligent design theory, but only by adding a metaphysical premise to the core argument for intelligent design, something like this. 1. There exist one or more reliable tests for detecting intelligent design. 2. Nature exhibits empirical data that passes one or more of the tests for reliably detecting intelligent design. 3. Therefore, at least one aspect of nature reliably signals intelligent design. 4, and this is the crucial metaphysical premise, the best explanation for intelligent design within nature is theistic. 5, therefore, the presence of intelligent design within nature supports theism. The axiological family of theistic arguments came to make clear the existence of relationships between the value of various non-divine realities and the existence of God. Consider the meta-ethical moral argument. Moral values are either objective things, that is, facts discovered by and thus independent of humans, or subjective things, things invented by and thus dependent upon humans. As atheist J.L. Mackie observed, objective values make the existence of a God more probable than it would have been without them. Thus, we have a defensible argument from morality, that is, morality of an objective kind, to the existence of a God. But of course, Mackie was an atheist, so he said that if we adopted instead a subjectivist account of morality, this problem would not arise. Well, which is the harder problem, or the harder pill to swallow? Believing in God, or believing that moral values are, in the end, only subjective? A meta-ethical moral argument might be put like this. 1. Objective moral values exist. 2. The existence of objective moral values is best explained by the existence of a God. Therefore, a God exists. Now, we use a small g God there because, as with many of these arguments, the conclusion doesn't tell you everything about God in terms that would match one-on-one with a Christian idea of God's nature. But as we said earlier in the video, these arguments kind of cumulatively add different aspects of an overall picture of God as they mount up together. Now, objective moral values seem to require a moral ideal that prescribes and obligates behavior, and before which we appropriately feel guilty. That's what objective moral values are, or do to us. But a moral ideal or character requires a mind of some kind. Prescription requires a prescriber, and obligation and guilt requires someone to obligate us and before whom to be guilty. As philosopher H.P. Owen argued, on the one hand, objective moral claims transcend every human person. On the other hand, it is contradictory to assert that impersonal claims are entitled to the allegiance of our wills. The only solution to this paradox is to suppose that the order of objective moral claims is in fact rooted in the personality of God. Now, what Oxford philosopher Richard Swinburne calls ramified natural theology highlights the fact that so-called Christian evidences, for example, the argument for Jesus' resurrection, the trilemma argument for his deity, or arguments about fulfilled biblical prophecy, don't just round out the case for God with reasons to believe in the Christian God, as in traditional classical apologetics, but can work as part of a cumulative argument for theism. Christian evidences that feature in ramified natural theology often make an argument to the best explanation on the basis of historically established data about Jesus. That's just a few of the dozens of theistic arguments defended by professional philosophers today. But as atheist Thomas Nagel reminds us, philosophy has to proceed comparatively. On the one hand, this means that the cumulative case for God must be balanced against the cumulative case for each alternative worldview. On the other hand, this means that the positive case for theism is reinforced by whatever negative case can be made against non-theistic worldviews. Let's think back to the person that we began with asking us, are there any good arguments for God? Well, how would you respond now?